Hello, this is Mandar Kulkarni, and I welcome you all to the Agile Planet podcast. Let us start with today's episode.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agile Planet. Today, our guest is Kumar Dattayteyan, who is located in Alexandria, Virginia, in United States. Kumar is a very senior Agile coach, executive coach, leadership coach, and he has recently acquired one of the coveted certifications from ICF, International Coaching Federation. The certificate is called ACC. With all that background, I'm sure Kumar has lot many understandings, lot many insights, and lot many experiences to share with all of us. So I would welcome Kumar and request him to introduce himself. Kumar, welcome to the Agile Planet, and please let us know a little bit more about yourself, your background, your passion, than what I explained.
Sure. Hi, Mandar. It was great to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Actually, my career in coaching started in Agile and coaching, both, I should say, started before I knew there was something called Agile or something called coaching. So in a prior life, I used to run restaurants. And I was one of the youngest general managers in various chain restaurants in the US in my 20s. And as a restaurant manager, I embraced a coaching style of leadership. Again, I was a young manager. I had a management team of folks that had much senior to me in age. You know, they were 10, 20 years, 30 years older than I was. And so I didn't know that I was doing what I was doing, but I was employing a more of a coaching style of leadership where I didn't try to be directive because that wouldn't have worked for them anyway. I attempted to be more of a coach to them to help them get to their fullest potential. And I feel like the restaurant business gave me an introduction to Agile, even though we weren't trained as Agilists or anything. And the reason I say that is because restaurants are very agile and nimble business, right? You think about the average product life cycle in a restaurant, and the life cycle in a restaurant is measured in minutes, not months or years. The last time you went to a restaurant, how long did it take for you to get your meal?
Maybe 10 minutes.
10 minutes, right?
Minutes.
10 minutes. 10 minutes was the cycle where you placed an order, to the waiter or the counter, wherever it was. And that started a process where it actually didn't start the process. The process started much before that, where someone had to order the food and ensure that the people were trained to cook it, that people were trained to package it and deliver it to you. But the actual act of creating that product was 10 minutes, right? And so as a restaurant manager, you have to really think about the full life cycle of a product, from ordering and hiring and training and all that. And of course, delivering, the delivery part occurs in 10 minutes. And so it's kind of a finely oiled machine that you have to run. And as a manager, we did stand-ups twice a day, once before lunch and once before dinner. We had planning sessions weekly where we planned our menu, we planned the entertainment, because I ran a full-service restaurant. And when I finally left restaurants and got into IT and heard about this thing called Agile and started to experiment with it, all of those ceremonies were very familiar to me, and called different things, but they were familiar because we did them.
Yeah. So this is extremely interesting journey that you have gone through. And until now, whosoever I have met and talked to as an Agile expert, you are perhaps the most unique person who has come from such a different background that restaurant management, and now you are when you are explaining, I'm thinking, oh my God, there is no 2 weeks sprint, and there is result is available instantaneously, because if the food is not good, the customer can get mad at you and all those kind of things. So bringing that experience into IT is something certainly very unique. So what I wanted to know is, as you were mentioning that you are one of the young managers in the restaurant industry, and many people working for you were much more senior than that, and your leadership style was completely different. How they were reacting to it? Perhaps whenever they had worked before any other manager, and now they are working under you, they must have seen a drastic sea difference, as we call it. So do you remember their reactions? Do you remember how they reacted in such environment?
Yeah, we had great teams. Every restaurant that I ran, and I was quite successful as a restaurant manager. I was at 25. No, I was 27 when I ran a training unit of a restaurant chain, and so we were responsible for training new managers coming through the system. And there was only one other training unit in the country. This is a large chain. They've gone bankrupt since I left the restaurant industry. Anyway, so I feel that the style that I employed, I would say was certainly successful for me, because I had some of the highest and most profitable restaurants in the country in the chains that I was employed. And I think that was a combination of the leadership that we provided as a team. It's not just me, right? It was certainly, I take some credit for that I was able to, at that young age, trust in the judgment, the experience of people that were older than me, that had been around in the restaurant business longer than me. And so someone saw something in me and made me the GM. And I felt that what I lacked in experience, I needed to make up for in other ways. And the only way I could see to do that was to trust in the knowledge, the experience of the people who were already there that come before me, right? And so I feel that they responded to that, right? They hadn't, restaurant business is very hierarchical. And the general managers I worked for general managers that were good, and I worked for some that weren't so good. And just like any other industry, right?
Yeah.
Very much command and control, and you do what they want you to do. And certainly the GM wasn't one that was in the front of the restaurant talking to customers. They were sort of the executive in the back of the restaurant, running the numbers. That wasn't me. I needed to be out there. I needed to be with the people, and I waited tables, I cooked, I cleaned the dishes, I did everything everyone else did, because I felt that in order to build a successful team, you had to be part of the team. If you're not part of the team, then you don't have a team. You just have a group of people that are there to collect a check, right? Cool. So that was my philosophy then, and it's one that I've cultivated over the years. I went into IT in my late 20s or early 30s, and finally was doing something that I went to school for, right? My degree, and of course I had to relearn everything because in the 7 or 8 years I was running restaurants, everything changed, of course. And so what I learned was no longer applicable. Different story, but getting into IT, I was in a very traditional organization, siloed mentality. I got requirements. I was a developer. I started out as a developer. I took a huge pay cut, got into the IT world because, well, frankly, I wasn't home very much. My kids were growing up, and I wasn't home to see them because one of the disadvantages of running a restaurant is restaurants are open when most people go home from their regular job, right? Restaurants stay open to serve them dinner and to entertain them and so on. And so, of course, I had to be there in the evenings.
Sure.
So left restaurants, got into IT, completely different world, very hierarchical, command and control. I was given requirements that I would code away, hand it to someone, and I wouldn't see the results of what I'd done for months because it went to some tester and the tester was busy. Yeah. And so I didn't get the results for months. And of course, when I finally got the results of what I worked on, I was working on something else. Cool. And I had to sort of put myself back into where I was months ago, try to figure out what I didn't do or did wrong or whatever it was. So it was a very, it was a hard transition for me those first few years out of restaurants and in IT. And for whatever reason, they promoted me. I became a manager of a team. And my turning point came when one of my developers, what's his name? I still keep in touch with him. Hopefully it'll come to me. He gave me a book. We were doing development, but we were doing very skunk works development in this department in the company. We were developing in prototypes and showing it to the customer and getting rapid feedback and making changes and so on and so forth. And so this developer, he came to me and he said, hey, Kumar, read this book. This is what we're doing. And the book was titled The Agile Primer by someone. I don't know who. It was a little tiny thin book, and it was about Agile. And I read this book, and I'm like, oh, my goodness, this is what I used to do in restaurants. This is great. It has a name. There's stand-ups and planning and collaboration and all this stuff. This is what we used to do. And I was excited again about my work, right? And I went to my director and I said, we need to do this completely all the way. Every team in our company needs to do this. And so he, luckily, a good boss that he was, Rick Baker, he got us some consultants and some coaches, Agile coaches. And they were with us for about 6 months or so, and we kind of ran with it after that. I was the internal coach for the next several years. This is about 2004, 2005. I got my initial Scrum certification in 2009, but by that point I was really coaching in this organization. Right. And I just never looked back. I mean, it was natural to me. It's what I grew up with, this way of working.
Right. Okay, great. So you started in IT industry from your background in restaurant, and you continued with almost immediately continued with Agile. That's what looks like. And from there, what other industries have you worked in addition to typical IT?
Yeah,
and
so
where you have seen Agile working well and helping you out?
So I worked for this company where I kind of grew up with Agile in this company for almost 10 years. So I started there in 2000 and worked right up until 2009 or so as that internal coach. And after that, I left and worked, became a sort of a consultant. Worked for different companies, consulting firms. I wanted to learn more about Agile and not just about Agile, but Agile in different industries. Agile in the government, Agile in non-software, Agile in software, Agile in embedded software. And I wanted to just figure out, okay, what is it about Agile that is common? Why does it work? Does it work even? I mean, can it work in government? And so I started out as a consultant, as I mentioned, and worked in various industries. Internet. Obviously, the first company I worked was as a consultant was Carfax. And what do? They get lots of data about automobiles and make it available to consumers, right? Used cars, to help car buyers make the best decision about the car that they're buying, get the best price for the car they're buying. But really what they're in the business of is data. They're providing a service to consumers, the data that they get from the DMVs around the country and insurance companies and police departments, accident reports, all this stuff. They're able to collate it, put it together, and then provide it to their consumers. And but it was a very data-centric company. They've been doing Agile since the beginning. They were actually an XP shop early in 2000 and sort of grew up. And that was my first experience to something outside of my original company. And then from there, I went to do some work with Agile in the government. So I worked a contract with the U.S. Postal Service. Different set of challenges, right? Most of the work, the workers are unionized, and so challenges with finding good people, keeping good talent, and challenges with getting rid of talent that isn't that talented because of the union, right? So different set of challenges with the government. I went on to work in other agencies in the government with the consulting firms I was with the CBP and the USCIS. And I had a small part to play in helping the USCIS draft contracting amendments to their contracting structure for smaller contracts, more agile contracts that the government would award companies. Going from these 5-year behemoth contracts to something that was more nimble, more agile, more iterative in the way that they would award the contracts and evaluate how the vendor was the partner was doing with the work that they were entrusted to. And then from there, I went into manufacturing and oil and gas. And, with manufacturing, it was really about embedded systems and how to software developers working in embedded systems. Embedded systems development is an interesting field because, the software goes on a chip and there are different cycles of development between hardware and software. They don't move at the same pace, right? And so a lot of challenges with software developers developing embedded systems because, well, maybe the board isn't ready. Whoever the supplier is supplying the boards, maybe they have a backlog. They won't get the new design until whenever. And so, some experience I had there. And that led me to healthcare. I was also in healthcare for a couple of years, right? So streamlining the way healthcare is members are brought into the program and how members are enrolled into the various healthcare programs, federal employment insurance, things that the differences between consumer, like commercial insurance and federal insurance and all the nuances there. I also worked with non-software people, companies like US NCARB, the National Council of Architectural Review Boards. They don't do software development. They're more of an advocacy and educational group that provides testing and certifications to architects around the country. And yes, there's technology involved, but most of what they do wasn't reliant on technology. It was more about the experts in the field, the people that certify architects, getting them to certify architects in different states and different regulations, different educational requirements, and so on and so forth. So it's helping them use Agile to prioritize the most important things in front of them. I've been talking a lot. I hope I'm answering your question.
Yeah. So what it tells me that you have worked in so many different industries, that Agile works in all these areas, although majority of the concept or misconcept, let's call it, that Agile is only for software. And your experience tells us that it is not true. In fact, Agile works in almost all these areas, right from, it was not a classical Agile in your restaurant part, but it was basic principles were the same. Short planning cycles, working with the teams, doing it quick deliverable, and finding out the results quickly. So that's a great takeaway, that Agile works in almost all these various industries, right from government to private and to non-software as well. That's a great takeaway. But I'm very curious about any stark difference you would draw between government working in a government agency versus working in the private industry?
Yeah, I mean, there certainly are differences. Governments, the funding model, the funding, and the contract award, and all of that it's still a big barrier. And I haven't done any government agency. Well, no, that's not true. I supported the NPD, the National. I forget what it stands for. Forgive me. It's part of U.S. CIS. It's a division, a small division of it. Anyway, it hasn't changed all that much, even though there were a lot of changes and a lot of enhancements made to the whole contracting process and the contracting model. With the playbook for agile software development that was developed for the government by the government, an amazing document that I think the private industry could use, right? It gives you sort of a stepwise guide on how to contract, and then not just contract, but then support the process of developing software where vendors are brought in to do the work. And it's not just something the government does, right? Large companies do the same thing. You talk about multinationals; they're not incubating their own software developers all the time. Unless you're Amazon. If you're Anthem or Blue Cross or Exxon or whatever, you're contracting a lot of work out.
Right.
So that USCIO's Agile Playbook is an amazing resource. However, culture is an interesting thing, right? And it's hard to change how an organization works overnight or over 10 years or over 20 years. Things take a long time to change because the underlying rules of the game haven't changed. So just because you change how you contract for software, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden the government and every agency in the government is going to work that way, right? And so it requires more of an organizational approach to change. And I think some agencies have achieved that. I don't want to misstate anything. It's been many years since I've been at the USCIS. I believe they have achieved a certain level of agility in that agency because they have, engaged in more of a cultural shift in how they acquire contracting help, how they evaluate the work that's being done, and they're working more in an agile way. Now, this was many years ago when I was there, so I don't know how things are. So take that with a grain of salt. So I think the common thread, though, with the government or private sector is, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. Nothing matters more than the basic reward models that reward behaviors that people in the organization are the people that are in the organization. If certain behaviors that lead to behaviors lead to outcomes, right? And if you reward certain behaviors that lead to certain outcomes, and those aren't the outcomes you want, then it doesn't matter what else you change. Those behaviors will exist, and the culture will change very slowly, if at all.
Certainly.
So the key really is about what is the outcome? What is the outcome that organizations want to change? What's the outcome that organizations want to achieve? And if you can identify those clearly, crisply, from the top of the chain of command to the people doing the work, and align people to those outcomes, and of course then reward people for the behaviors that lead to them, then there's a much better chance of achieving agility, business agility.
Absolutely. Wow, that's a good point. Yeah, great. Let us talk about the scaling part of Agile that almost all of us are working on various frameworks in Agile. In your experience, which frameworks have you handled, and would you be able to compare them and say that this has worked better compared to other framework? Or what is your experience about the frameworks in general?
Yeah, that's a good question. Frameworks, and certainly it leads to the whole frameworks war, right? Um, for me, I think of myself as a pragmatist, an agile pragmatist, and I'm an agilist first, and then it's about applying the right tools to the job. And I feel like the frameworks are the tools that you apply to the job. And in some cases, Scrum is the ideal tool. In some cases, it's not. It's more a Kanban approach because of the type of work that the organization's doing, right? And then, of course, when it comes to scaling, I've experienced scaling organically with different companies, meaning, we've created our own scaling models. At Carfax, we had something that was eerily similar to Spotify. If only I'd had the foresight, and the marketing genius that someone like Dean Leffingwell had, I would probably be retired by now. I don't know. But I didn't have that foresight, and that's, I guess, what separates the genius from the average, right? And so my point is that we created a framework at Carfax that allowed us to scale, and we scaled really by descaling, by focusing on the core elements of the value creation engine. And what I mean by that is the value creation engine are your teams, they're your people. And so it's about freeing that potential as much as possible, making sure that teams have the information, I'm going to go back to the Agile Manifesto, right? The principles. Make sure that teams have the environment, the trust, and I forget all the words in that principle to get the job done, right? So alignment leads to autonomy. So if teams are aligned, then they're going to be able. You don't have to direct them that much. They can work more or less autonomously because they know the direction to go.
Correct.
Right. And so I've had the experience of that at certain companies, and I've certainly seen the opposite too, where there's almost a devotion to a certain framework without an understanding of the principles behind them, or an understanding of the behaviors that leads to the outcome that the organization wants to achieve. Right. And so SAFe, there's nothing wrong with SAFe. I love SAFe, actually. I think the model is great. However, I have only seen very few examples of successful SAFe implementations, the Scaled Agile framework. And I don't think it's because it's safe. It's just, I think it's, again, that underlying organizational change element that wasn't considered probably, right? The hierarchical model of the organization, the not enough was intent or attention was given to ensuring that there was alignment between the outcome, the purported outcomes, and the people doing the work. Yeah, I don't know if I answered your question. So I've used SAFe, I've used Scrum, I've used Kanban, I've dabbled in less. I'm familiar with Nexus. I'm familiar with most of the frameworks. I was learning the DAD framework, Discipline Agile framework as well. I love them. I mean, it's some amazing work that was put together by some amazing people. But for me, I sort of look at where the organization is and try to look more at the humans in the organization. What's going to give them the best chance of achieving their outcomes, and what structures do we need to put in place to allow that to happen?
Okay, that's the role of a framework, or that's the way how you implement the framework. Okay, great. I want to ask you about your association or your work in the field of education or training. We got introduced as you were working as a lead accreditor for IC Agile organization. And from there, I have seen that you are playing very important role and you are teaching Agile classes. So tell me or tell us more about your journey in Agile training. What are the areas you train and all that background?
Yeah, great question. I have, I'm thinking because there's a lot to unpack here. By now you would have noticed that I have lots to say and I'm trying to be as concise as possible. I never considered myself a trainer or a teacher until I took a class from Sharon Bowman, Training from the Back of the Room. A huge shout out to Sharon Bowman. She's awesome. I loved it so much that it sort of made it became my passion to be able to train in a way that it was my style of training, right? Training from the back of the room. Even the name of it implies that the trainer isn't the sage on the stage. The trainer is more facilitating the learning from the group. And so I really put those concepts to practice. I'm also a certified trainer of the Training from the Back of the Room program. But anyway, so since then, this is about 2013 or 14, I have created lots of training for some of the companies I worked for as a consultant and now more recently for myself that really embody those principles of training from the back of the room, connecting the learning to the audience and teaching them concepts, but not droning on for hours in a lecture, right? Just a short bite-sized lecture segments followed by concrete practice, allowing them to really understand how to apply what they learn to their jobs and finally concluding it with some kind of an activity that helps them retain as much as possible from the learning. So long story short, I use this style for all of my training. I have lots of training classes now. To your question about IC Agile, I used to be an accreditor for them. I no longer am. I'm still very good friends with the company. I support everything that they do. Most of my classes that I've created are IC Agile certified. And the reason is since I'm training a lot of classes that are IC Agile certified, there's a conflict of interest in terms of being an accreditor and also a trainer of these same classes, right? So I don't do that anymore for that reason. But while I was there, I got to meet lots of wonderful people from around the world and got to see their work, their creative work in taking the learning objectives from IC Agile and converting those learning objectives into these beautiful slides in some cases, exercises, you name it, right? And so I got to see their creative work. I got to help them make it even better so that the training that they delivered for their students, their clients, is world-class. What did I not answer in that question?
No, that is what I wanted to get from you. And as we are almost talking for almost half an hour, but the last important question before we wrap it up, I want to ask about your latest achievement of ICF certification. ICF certification, as I'm a little bit familiar with, it is not necessarily the Agile certification. It's a general coaching certification. And since you have achieved it, tell us a little bit more about this certification, your journey towards that. What helped you in achieving that certification, and what would you recommend other Agile coaches to, whether you will recommend other Agile coaches to go for ICF certification and why?
Yeah, good question. So ICF, it stands for the International Coaching Federation, and it is it's the largest, I think, coaching body in the world by its name, international, right? And it's an organization that credentials professional coaches, and so I got interested in professional coaching several years ago. Actually, it started with a program I took with John Maxwell. Leadership coaching and training and speaking. And I was introduced to John Maxwell several years ago by a fellow Agile coach that said, "Hey, Kumar, you really have to do this." And so I went and I learned, and I discovered that most Agile coaches are really more Agile consultants, right? And there's a difference between coaching and consulting, and most of what we do as coaches in the professional coaching world would be considered consulting, right?
There is always that distinction comes in picture, and sometimes the lines are very blurry.
That's true. They are blurry. However, when you think about it, most people hire an Agile coach because they want an Agile coach to come in and tell them what to do, right? How to implement Agile. And so, and of course, we're happy to oblige. Do this. Don't do that. You're not doing your stand-up right. You're not writing your stories right. So on and so forth. And so all of that is consulting. And of course, you need that, right? So if someone wants to implement Agile, of course, you're going to need to show them, teach them, mentor them, guide them. At some point, the relationship shifts to once they're understanding the basics, then what they really need is coaching. And coaching is a different modality. It's different from consulting. It's different from mentoring. Coaching is really about exposing to the client things that they may not see themselves. And you do that not by telling them what they're not seeing. You do that by probing, by asking questions, by raising the client's awareness to their blind spots. And it's a subtle distinction. It's a really hard skill to master. And it's been a long journey, with John Maxwell. This was back it wasn't 5 years. It was probably more like 4 years ago, I guess, 2017. And then more recently, I took a course with the Academy of Creative Coaching. By the way, I'm now a faculty member there, so I'll be teaching for the Academy. Yeah, for the Academy of Creative Coaching, I'll be teaching professional coaching classes. People how to achieve their certification, their credential. So we can talk about that another time. But basically, I'll be teaching for them this year. So where was I? Yeah. So it's been a long journey. It's been a 4-year journey. And I this year, on the 31st of December, I achieved the ACC credential, Associate Coaching certification. And I'm very happy. I'm very proud of it. And I'm actually really close to the next level, which is the PCC, the Professional Coach credential. And so it's just a matter of submitting some sample recordings for the people there to evaluate for that. As far as Agile coaching, I absolutely recommend it to explore more of the world of coaching. It's only going to make you a better coach. There's a lot of very successful Agile coaches that stay in the consulting role and maybe some mentoring role and never really go into coaching. And that's fine, totally fine. But if you are interested in really raising the potential of your clients, really helping them embrace Agile ways of working, or just anything about them, they're raising their own potential, then I think it behooves any coach to be aware of and be an expert at the craft, the profession of coaching. Absolutely. And I also think that for professional coaches, it would behoove you to understand Agile, because the two aren't all so dissimilar. In fact, one of the things that I want to do is help bring Agile to professional coaches.
Yeah, so that's definitely very complementary, and both of them will definitely help each other. Great. Thank you so much, Kumar. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge, experience, and insights with us. I'm sure my audience of this podcast will enjoy it, will love it. And with that note, again, I want to thank you and say that let's wrap this up today here.
Thanks.
Thank
Thanks
you.
a lot, Mandar. Appreciate it.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share, and subscribe to this podcast and to this YouTube channel. Thank you.